The joke slipped out so easily. One Tuesday afternoon in July, standing by the broken fence at the creek's edge, Elijah looked at Clara, sunlight catching her hair, his daughter Maya giggling at her feet, and said it like it meant nothing. "Whoever marries you is one lucky man." Clara did not laugh it off. She did not look away either. She just held his gaze, color rising slowly to her cheeks, and said nothing at all. But the silence that followed was not empty. It was the most honest thing either of them had said in months. Mill Haven, Colorado sat in a valley so quiet that on still mornings you could hear the creek running a quarter-mile off. The town had one hardware store, one diner, one bakery, and the kind of sky that made people forget there was anywhere else to be. Elijah Carter had lived here his whole life, first in his parents' house on the East Ridge, then in the log cabin he had rebuilt board by board after his wife passed. He was 28 years old and ran a small cattle operation on 12 acres. It was not a large spread by Colorado standards, but it was his paid for in early mornings and late nights, and every dollar he had not spent on anything else. He was one of the few black men in the valley who owned land outright, and he carried that fact quietly the way he carried most things. His daughter Maya was 4. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, and she filled the cabin with a noise that kept the grief from settling too deep. Elijah had learned to cook simple meals, braid hair badly, and read the same picture book so many times he could recite them in the dark. He had not learned how to stop waking at 3 in the morning, reaching for someone who was not there. The Harmons lived on the property east of his, separated by a stretch of creek and a fence line that had seen better days. Daniel Harmon ran a small hay operation. His wife Ruth kept a garden that fed half the street in summer. And their daughter Clara had come back to Mill Haven about a year ago after something in the city had not worked out the way she had planned. She did not talk much about what that something was, and the town, to its credit, did not press. Clara was 24 and worked the morning shift at the bakery on Main Street. She was up before dawn most days, flour on her sleeves by 6, done by early afternoon. She had a way of moving through the world that was unhurried and deliberate, like she was always making sure of her footing before she took the next step. Elijah had noticed that about her long before he admitted he had noticed anything at all. She had started watching Maya on the afternoons he could not manage both the cattle and the child at once. It had begun practically. Ruth Harmon had offered, Clara had been home, and 4-year-olds needed watching, but somewhere along the way it had become something else. Something Elijah did not have a clean name for. What Clara had told almost no one was that coming back to Mill Haven had not felt like a choice. It had felt like the only door left unlocked. She had spent 2 years in Denver with a man named Ryan who was easy to love at the start and harder to trust by the end. She had left without a scene, packed 2 bags, and driven back to the valley on a Tuesday in October. She got the job at the bakery and fell back into the rhythms of a small town, and was careful, very careful about the distance she kept between herself and anything that looked like hope. She had not planned on Maya. She had not planned on the way a 4-year-old's total confidence in you could undo months of careful self-containment. And she had absolutely not planned on the particular way Elijah Carter looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention. The spring rains that year were heavy enough to take out 2 sections of the fence along the creek. Elijah discovered the damage on a Monday morning, posts leaning into the mud wire dragging. He had a small herd and open water nearby, and a broken fence line was not something he could leave. He pulled on his boots and went out to start the work. It was the following Tuesday afternoon when Clara appeared on the other side of what remained of the fence. She had not come to help with the repair. She did not know he was out there. She had come to hang laundry on the line her family had strung between 2 cottonwoods near the bank, and she had brought Maya with her, who had apparently decided the laundry expedition was more interesting than the cartoons Elijah had left on for her inside. He saw them before they saw him. Maya was sitting on the grass very serious while Clara knelt behind her and worked through a tangle in her hair with patient fingers. Clara was talking softly. Elijah could not make out the words over the creek, and Maya was nodding along like whatever was being said was deeply important. Occasionally, Maya would reach up and touch Clara's hand just to make sure she was still there. Elijah stood with a fence post in his hands and watched them. He had seen Clara help with Maya before, tying shoes, pouring juice, settling arguments about which stuffed animal got to sit at the dinner table. But something about this particular moment, the afternoon light and the way Clara's hands moved like she had all the time in the world, lodged itself somewhere behind his ribs and refused to leave. He went back to work. He did not say anything about what he had seen. Later that evening, after Clara had gone home and Maya was asleep, Clara sat at her own kitchen table for a long time. She looked at her hands, the same hands that had just worked through Maya's hair, and thought about the way Elijah had gone very still when he had come around the fence post and found them there. She had noticed. She always noticed. She told herself it did not mean anything. She got up and started making dinner and did not think about it again, or at least she tried not to, which is a different thing entirely. That same night, Elijah sat on the porch in the dark and thought about the fact that he had not said anything. He was good at not saying things. He had built an entire life around it. The town held its summer gathering on the last Saturday of July. The way it did every year, tables set up in the park behind the feed store, someone's uncle grilling children running until they dropped. Elijah brought Maya because he brought Maya everywhere. He had cleaned her up and put her in her good dress, and she had immediately found a mud puddle within 4 minutes of arrival, which felt about right. He spotted Clara from across the park. She was wearing a blue dress, simple and neat, and she was laughing at something the woman next to her had said. She looked entirely at ease in a way that Elijah was not, and had perhaps never been. He counted without meaning to 3 different men who drifted toward her over the course of the evening. She was polite with all of them. She did not encourage any of them. But Elijah watched from his corner of the park and felt something tighten in his chest that he recognized with some discomfort as jealousy. He was holding a paper plate of potato salad he had not touched when Edna Morrison appeared at his elbow. Mrs. Morrison was 71 years old, had buried one husband and outlasted another, and had long since stopped caring what anyone thought of what she said. She was carrying a small foil-wrapped package, which she pressed into Elijah's free hand without preamble. "Lemon bars," she said. "From this morning." Elijah thanked her. She did not move. She looked out at the park at Clara specifically, though she was not obvious about it, and said almost to herself, "You leave fruit on the tree long enough, somebody else comes along and picks it." Then she tucked her hands into her cardigan pockets and walked away. Elijah looked down at the lemon bars. He looked back across the park. Clara had moved on to a conversation with Ruth and Daniel, and the 3 men had dispersed, and none of that made the tightness in his chest any looser. He collected Maya from the mud situation and carried her home on his shoulder when she fell asleep on the drive. Walking from the truck to the cabin door, Maya's warm weight against his neck, stars overhead, and the smell of summer grass coming up from the field, Elijah stopped in the yard and looked up for a moment. He was in love with Clara Harmon. He had been probably for a while. He had wrapped it up in practicality and caution and the very reasonable argument that a widowed black man with a cattle operation and a 4-year-old was not exactly what a 24-year-old woman needed, and all of that was still true, and none of it had done anything to change what he felt. He put Maya to bed. He sat on the porch again in the dark. He thought about fruit on trees. He thought about somebody else coming along. He did not sleep much that night. There are people who look at a man like Elijah, steady, self-sufficient, quiet, and assume he has no interior life worth examining, that the hard work and the early mornings and the fence mending are the whole story. But the truth is that men who have learned to carry loss without showing it have usually developed a very elaborate inner architecture. They know exactly where the weight is distributed. They know which walls are load-bearing. Elijah knew that his caution around Clara was not really about practicality. It was about the particular terror of wanting something again after he had already lost the most important thing. Loving someone meant handing them a piece of the structure, and he was not sure the structure could survive another collapse. Some walls are not meant to be demolished. They are meant to be walked through one careful step, one honest word at a time. The hardest part is not the fear itself. It is admitting that the fear has been making your decisions for you. August came in hot and flat, the kind of heat that pressed down on the valley from above and radiated back up from the ground in equal measure. The cattle moved slow. The creek dropped 2 inches. Elijah worked from first light until the air cooled enough to breathe, and he told himself that was why he had not done anything, had not said anything since the summer gathering. He was busy. The ranch demanded it. That was the reason. He believed this approximately as much as it deserved. What he did, instead of saying anything, was find small ways to be useful. He fixed the gate on the Harmon property that had been sticking since spring. He left a cord of firewood stacked by their barn without mentioning it. When Clara texted to ask if Maya needed pickup from the neighbor's house one afternoon, he replied within seconds and then stared at the phone for 10 minutes afterward, trying to understand why a text message could do that to a grown man. The one occasion that broke through his careful routines came midway through August, when Clara mentioned that old Earl Briggs, who lived alone in a house at the far end of the road and had not been well, had not been into town in over 2 weeks. She had made a pot of soup and was going to bring it over. She said it simply not as an invitation. Elijah said he would come with her. He said it before he had finished deciding to. They walked the half-mile to Earl's place in the late afternoon, Maya staying back with Ruth. Earl met them at the door looking thinner than the last time Elijah had seen him, but his eyes were sharp and he was clearly pleased to have company. He waved them in, made them sit at his kitchen table, and refused to let anyone leave until he had told 3 stories that Elijah had heard before, and Clara apparently had not. While Clara heated the soup on Earl's old stovetop, the old man watched Elijah with the particular attention of someone who had lived long enough to spot avoidance from across a room. Earl had a hinge on his back door that had been broken so long the door no longer closed flush. He asked Elijah with great innocence if he might take a look at it while Clara finished in the kitchen. Elijah crouched at the doorframe with his pocket knife assessing. Earl stood nearby, ostensibly supervising. "That hinge has been off since March," Earl said conversationally. "I kept meaning to get to it, just kept putting it off, thinking it wasn't urgent." He watched Elijah work. "But a door that doesn't close right, eventually the whole frame warps. Then you've got a bigger problem than a hinge." From the kitchen came the soft sound of Clara moving around the clink of a spoon against the pot. Earl looked toward the kitchen doorway, then back at Elijah. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. Elijah tightened the hinge. He did not look up. They stayed for another hour. On the walk back, just as the light was going golden over the ridge, Clara said she was glad they had gone together. Elijah said he was too. They walked the rest of the way in a quiet that was not uncomfortable, the kind that had started to feel over recent weeks like its own form of conversation. It was another Tuesday when it happened, because Elijah would think later it was always a Tuesday. He had gone out to finish the last section of fence repair along the creek, the same stretch that the spring rains had taken out, the same ground where he had first watched Clara braid Maya's hair. The afternoon was cooler than it had been, a hint of what was coming in the air. He worked steadily and tried not to notice when Clara came down to the bank on her side to collect something she had left drying on the cottonwood line. She gathered her things and was about to head back when she slowed, then stopped looking at the fence work he had done. "You've been at this all season," she said. "Fence doesn't fix itself," Elijah said. Clara looked at him the way she sometimes did, like she was reading something that was not quite on the surface. "You're good at taking care of things." He did not know what to do with that, so he did what he always did with things he did not know what to do with. He deflected sideways into something that sounded lighter than it was. "Whoever marries you," Elijah said, his voice landing somewhere between easy and careful, "is one lucky man." He had meant it as the kind of thing you say when you are trying to say something else. A door cracked open just wide enough to see through, but small enough to pretend was accidental. Clara turned to look at him fully. Color came up slow in her face, not a blush of embarrassment exactly, but something more considered than that. She held his gaze for a long moment, long enough that the creak noise seemed to get louder in the space between them. She did not answer. She picked up her laundry basket and walked back toward her house without looking back. Elijah stood at the fence line with a post driver in his hands, and the distinct feeling that he had both said too much and not nearly enough. That night, Clara stood at her kitchen counter and worked a batch of bread dough long past the point it needed working. She kneaded it and folded it and pushed the heels of her hands into it and thought about the creek and the fence and the particular way Elijah had looked at her when he said what he had said. She knew it was not a joke. She had known him long enough by now to know when he was performing casualness. And she also had known for a while that what she felt when she was around him was not the simple neighborly warmth she had told herself it was. But she had been here before. She had felt certain before. She had rearranged her life around someone before and come home in October with 2 bags and a very quiet devastation that she had spent the better part of a year putting back together. So she kept her hands in the dough and did not let herself go further than the question she had been sitting with for weeks. Was he serious? Would he actually do something? Or would he stay in the doorway forever, half in and half out, and let them both pretend the whole thing was just neighborly kindness and Tuesday afternoons by the creek? She was not willing to find out by being the one to step forward first. She had done that before, too. She covered the dough, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. A week later, Elijah knocked on Daniel Harmon's door on a Sunday morning and asked to speak with him. Daniel was a measured man, not given to displays of much in either direction. He regarded Elijah from the porch with an expression that gave nothing away. He had known Elijah his whole life. He had watched him lose his wife and hold his land and raise his daughter, and he had a great deal of respect for all 3 of those things. He also had a daughter who had come home from the city quieter than she had left, and he was not about to be careless with her. Elijah said clearly that he had feelings for Clara and would like permission to pursue something serious if she was open to it. He did not dress it up. He said he understood if Daniel had reservations, and he said it like he meant it, not like he was asking to be reassured. Daniel looked at him for a long time. He asked one question. "You understand she's not a consolation prize for a lonely man?" "Yes, sir," Elijah said. "I do." Daniel gave a short nod and said he would leave it to Clara to decide what she wanted. He said this in a tone that made clear the conversation was over, but that Elijah had passed some portion of whatever test had just been administered. Elijah drove home and went back to work. In the weeks that followed, he and Clara settled into something that was not yet named but had a shape to it. Dinners that ran longer than they needed to, easy phone calls that started about Maya's schedule, and drifted elsewhere the particular comfort of 2 people learning what the other one sounds like when tired or frustrated or laughing for real. During those same weeks, on an evening when the work was done and Maya was in bed, Elijah stood in his kitchen and looked at the wall that faced east. He had thought about that wall for a long time, thought about how the morning light would come through if there was a window there, thought about who he was imagining in this kitchen on a winter morning when he let himself imagine it. He got his tools and framed it out that same night, rough cut, unfinished, covered with a sheet of plastic that let in pale, diffused light. He told himself it was a practical improvement. He told himself it had nothing to do with anyone in particular. He was not entirely convincing even to himself. The autumn that came to Mill Haven that year was the kind that made the valley look like a painting of itself, red and gold, climbing the ridges, cold air off the mountains by October. What Elijah did not know during those warm evenings of shared dinners and long phone calls was that Clara's old life had sent a message. Her mother had mentioned quietly and without pressure that Ryan had called, that he had something stable now in Denver, that he had asked for another chance. Clara had not called him back, but she had not thrown away the piece of paper with his number on it either, and she was aware that this ambivalence was its own kind of information. On an evening in mid-October, Elijah was walking to the Harmons for dinner when he heard voices through the kitchen window, which had been cracked open against the heat of cooking. He had his hand raised to knock on the door when he caught Daniel's voice, calm and factual, saying, "Clara's name, then Ryan's name, then the word Denver." Elijah did not hear Clara's response. He could not make it out from where he stood. He lowered his hand. He stood on the porch boards in the cold and felt the bottom drop out of the evening in a way that was quiet and total. He thought about Ryan easier. No daughter, no grief, no weight. He thought about what Clara deserved, which was someone who could offer her a life without complications already built in. He thought about his wife, about the silence that had followed her death, about the tenuousness of everything he loved. He turned around and walked back to his truck. He drove home, checked on Maya, asleep in her room, and stood in his kitchen looking at the east-facing window frame he had built with his own hands' rough wood, no glass covered in plastic sheeting that moved faintly in the draft. He sent a text to Clara saying something had come up with the cattle. She replied with a single okay and a question mark, and he did not know what to say to the question mark, so he said nothing. Over the following days, he kept his distance. He was polite when they crossed paths. He found reasons to be occupied. He told himself this was the right thing, stepping back before either of them went further, before the damage could reach Maya, before he built something out of hope that would come apart the way the last thing he had built had come apart. In her kitchen, 3 nights after the dinner that did not happen, Clara looked at her phone and read Elijah's short, careful responses and understood that something had shifted. She did not know what. She only knew the warmth had pulled back like a tide going out, and that she was standing on the shore trying to figure out what she had missed. On her kitchen table, face down and not yet thrown away, was the piece of paper with Ryan's number on it. She had not called him. She also had not gotten rid of it, which she recognized was its own kind of answer to a question she was not ready to face. She was not waiting for Ryan. But she was not sure how much longer she could wait for a man who kept standing at the edge of something and not stepping through. To love someone is to accept that they carry the right to hurt you. That is not a flaw in love, it is the price of its honesty. The question is never whether the risk is real. It is whether what you are protecting yourself from is worth more than what you are protecting yourself against. It was Maya who broke it open, not with anything dramatic. She simply climbed onto the kitchen chair across from Elijah one morning in late October, wrapped both hands around a cup of warm milk, and asked in the direct way that 4-year-olds ask things why Clara had not come over lately. Elijah was at the stove. He did not answer right away. "Is she mad?" Maya asked. "No," Elijah said. "She's not mad." Maya considered this. "Did you do something wrong?" He turned off the burner. He stood with his back to his daughter for a moment, looking at the east-facing window he had framed out weeks ago. Rough wood, no glass yet, covered with a sheet of plastic that let in a pale, diffused light. He had built it thinking of Clara in this kitchen on a winter morning, built it before he had even spoken to Daniel Harmon, before the summer gathering, before he had admitted to himself what he was actually doing. He had built it as a quiet act of hope, and then he had walked away from the woman it was meant for. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think maybe I did." Maya nodded gravely, as though this confirmed something she had already suspected. "You should say sorry," she said. "That's what you tell me." Elijah looked at his daughter, 4 years old, sitting in an oversized chair with her cup of milk, entirely certain about things he had managed to make complicated for months. He got her dressed and dropped her at Ruth Harmon's house. Ruth asked no questions. She simply took Maya's hand and brought her inside, and Elijah drove back to his property and walked the fence line for an hour in the cold because he needed to think, and he thought better moving. He had spent weeks telling himself that stepping back was an act of consideration, that he was protecting Clara from the weight of his life, from the risk of another loss, from the complication of a man who came with a child and a cattle operation and a grief that had not fully resolved itself. He had dressed his fear up in selflessness so many times, it had almost started to look like the real thing. But that morning in the kitchen, watching Maya explain basic human decency over a cup of warm milk, something in him gave up the argument. He was not protecting Clara. He was protecting himself. And in doing so, he was making her decision for her, deciding she could not handle the weight, deciding she was better off with easier options, deciding for her what she deserved. That was not consideration. That was just a quieter kind of cowardice. He went back inside. He sat at the kitchen table and took out of his top drawer the one thing he had not let himself look at in 4 years. His mother's silver ring, simple and plain, the one she had worn every day of her married life and pressed into his hand the last time he had seen her before she passed. He had put it in that drawer the week after his wife died, not ready to look at it, and not able to throw it away. He held it for a long time. Then he put it in his jacket pocket. He went and got Maya from the Harmon's house, and he asked Ruth quietly if Clara was home. Clara was at the creek. She had her jacket pulled tight and her hands in her pockets, and she was standing at the bank looking at the water, which had dropped further with the cold. The cottonwood trees had gone bare. The fence line Elijah had repaired all summer stood solid and straight along the property edge, posts set deep wire taut. It had been a Tuesday when he had said what he had said by this same bank. It was a Tuesday now. She heard them before she saw them. Maya's boots on the frozen grass, Elijah's steadier footfall behind her. She turned. Maya broke away from her father's hand and crossed the distance between them without any preamble, wrapping both arms around Clara's legs, the way she had been doing since she was 2. Clara bent and picked her up automatically, and Maya settled against her shoulder like she had always fit there. Elijah stopped a few feet away. He looked like a man who had made a decision and was now standing inside it. "I owe you an explanation," he said. Clara waited. 2 weeks ago, Elijah said, "I was walking to your parents' house for dinner. I had my hand up to knock on the door, and I heard your father mention Ryan's name. I heard him say Ryan wanted another chance." He kept his eyes on her. "I didn't hear what you said back. And instead of knocking and having a conversation like a reasonable person, I walked back to my truck and went home and spent 2 weeks telling myself I was doing you a favor." Clara was very still. "I wasn't," Elijah said. "I was scared. I've been scared since before the summer gathering, before the creek, before any of it. I've been scared since the first time I realized that what I felt for you wasn't something I could file under neighborly." He reached into his jacket pocket. "I lost my wife. I know what that kind of loss does to a person, and I know what it does to a child. And I convinced myself that the safest thing for you, for Maya, for everyone, was for me to stay back and let things be." He looked down at what was in his hand before continuing. "But Maya asked me this morning why you hadn't come around, and I couldn't answer her. And I realized I'd been teaching her without knowing it, that when things get hard, you go quiet and disappear. And that's not what I want to teach her." Maya was watching her father from Clara's shoulder with great seriousness. "I'm not asking you to take on my grief or my complications or any of the weight that comes with my life," Elijah said. "I know it's a lot. I know I come with things that are already built in, but I'm asking you, if you're still open to it, to let me stop being someone who stands in doorways." He opened his hand. His mother's silver ring sat in his palm, plain and worn and absolutely real. "I'm not asking because I'm lonely," he said. "I'm asking because I love you, because you're the person Maya asks for. Because you make this valley feel like somewhere I chose to be instead of somewhere I stayed by default. And because I built a window in my kitchen facing east before I even had the courage to speak to your father, built it thinking of you in that kitchen on a winter morning, and then spent weeks trying to pretend it was just a renovation. There are those who believe that a man who has already loved and lost becomes practical above all else. That grief burns the romanticism out of a person and leaves something harder and more functional behind. But that reading misses something essential. When a man who has already lost everything decides to love again, he is not being practical. He is being brave in the most specific and costly way possible. He is choosing to rebuild the very thing he knows can be destroyed. There is no casualness in that. There is no half measure. It is the most serious thing a person can do. Clara stood at the creek bank with Maya on her hip and looked at Elijah, this careful, stubborn, quietly devoted man, and felt something in her chest that she had been holding at arm's length for most of a year. Finally stopped struggling. She had listened to the whole thing without interrupting. She had watched his face while he spoke and seen for the first time with complete clarity what he had been carrying. Not just the grief which she had known about, but the specific architecture of his fear, the way he had built his caution into something that looked like strength, and how much it had cost him to take it apart. She understood that cost. She had paid a version of it herself. "I didn't call Ryan," she said. "I want you to know that. The number was on my table for a week, and I didn't call him." She looked at Elijah steadily. "Not because I was waiting for you to do something. I didn't call him because he was never the one I was trying to figure out how to trust again." Elijah was very still. "I was scared too," Clara said. "I came back to Millhaven because I'd already made one mistake with a man I thought I understood, and I wasn't about to make another. So I kept everything at a distance and told myself it was wisdom." She She glanced down at Maya, who was studying both of them with intense interest. And then this one started asking me to braid her hair and wanting me around, and it got harder to keep the distance. She looked back at Elijah. I kept waiting to see if you'd show up. Actually show up. I'm here, Elijah said. It was simple and direct and not dressed up in anything. I know, Clara said. She shifted Maya to her other hip. She looked at the ring in his hand, his mother's ring worn smooth with years, and then back at his face. Ask me, she said. Elijah took a breath. Will you marry me? Not just me, us. Me and Maya and the cattle and the drafty cabin and the window I built that doesn't have glass in it yet. Something moved at the edge of his mouth. I'll get the glass. Clara laughed and it broke the cold air open. Maya, sensing that something good had happened, said yay with great confidence despite having no specific information to support this position. Yes, Clara said. I'll marry you. She said it the way she did most things, unhurried, deliberate, completely certain of her footing. And it landed precisely where it needed to, closing the loop on a Tuesday afternoon in July when he had said something that sounded like a joke and meant every word of it. The town of Mill Haven held its opinion on most things loosely, but it held its affection for the people who stuck around and built something real with considerable warmth. When Elijah and Clara married the following April on a Saturday when the valley had gone green and the creek was running high with snowmelt, the whole of the road turned out. Earl Briggs came in his good jacket he had recovered steadily through the winter, and by March was back at the diner on Tuesday mornings the way he had always been. Edna Morrison brought lemon bars and said nothing in particular, which was for her a form of deep satisfaction. Daniel Harmon walked his daughter across the field between the two properties and gave her hand to Elijah at the creek bank, where the repaired fence stood between what had been two separate pieces of land and was now quietly one life. Elijah's vows were not long. He said he promised to be her husband the way she deserved, not someone who handed her difficulty and called it partnership, but someone who made sure she had room to be taken care of, to be soft, when she wanted to be soft, to not spend her life being strong on behalf of other people, while no one thought to ask what she needed. He said he had spent enough time being afraid of loss to know that it was not the worst thing. The worst thing was letting fear do the choosing for you. Maya stood next to her father in a yellow dress and held the rings with the gravity of someone who understood she was part of something important. 5 years on the cabin had a glass window facing east in the kitchen. Clara had lined the sill with small clay pots of herbs that she used for her baking, and on winter mornings the light came through them and scattered green shadows across the counter. There was a second child now, a boy they named Thomas, who had learned to walk by holding on to the cattle fence and had his mother's patience and his father's stubbornness in equal measure. The tangle of noise that filled the property on any given afternoon. Thomas underfoot, Maya home from school with opinions about everything, Clara's radio on in the kitchen, cattle moving in the far field, was not the life Elijah had planned. He had not planned anything in the end. He had just one Tuesday in November stopped standing in the doorway. On an afternoon in the fall of that 5th year, he came in from the field and stood in the kitchen doorway watching Clara at the counter, flower on her sleeve, the late light coming low through the east window. She was telling Thomas something, and Thomas was listening with the absolute confidence of a child who believes everything his mother says is true. Elijah thought about a July afternoon at a creek bank, a line that had come out of him like a half-opened door, and the silence that had followed, heavy and real and full of everything neither of them had said yet. He had called it luck then. Standing here now, he understood it differently. It was not luck that had brought Clara into his kitchen and his daughter's life and the east-facing light of his mornings. It was the single decision made once to stop letting fear be the loudest voice in the room. That was not luck. That was the whole thing. Real happiness is not the absence of damage. It is what happens when two people, each carrying their own broken pieces, decide that what they are building together is worth more than what they are protecting themselves from. That decision is not made once. It is made every morning you choose to stay.